I am Josh Owens, and I'm here to talk about what I've learned from my, 18 months that I've used Meteor now. You can find me on Twitter at Josh Owens or github.com/queso. I also just started doing a weekly newsletter talking about all things Meteor. You can sign up for that at Meteorjs.club. I also do the Meteor podcasts, and I run a news website called Crater.io. It's kind of like Hacker News or Reddit, specifically for Meteor. So that's how you can find me. So how many people in here use JavaScript? Wow, okay. So that's like 99%. How many of you have heard or used Meteor before? Heard of or used? Quite a bit, okay. So Meteor, I wrote this down. It's this crazy sentence. Meteor is an ultra-simple database, anywhere, data on the wire, pure JavaScript framework. So that's just a fancy way to say that they've built an entire platform around JavaScript, and they're trying to push the envelope on how web apps work. So we'll dive a little more into that. So when I wrote this talk, I actually worked at a company called Differential. They were kind of like a startup accelerator. You would come in and do an 8-week stint with them, build an app, and then go out and learn from that. And in the time that I was there, we had 4 developers, and we built over 40 apps. I realized today that was probably in about 10 months that we built 40 apps. So we really dove deep on what it would take to prototype an application in Meteor. And a lot of that was actually the packaging system. So this is a screenshot of Atmosphere, which is the place you can go to search for packages. This is my profile. You can see I've got 6 packages on here. They actually just changed all this. Before it was all under Differential, and we had 10 packages. So getting started, I think this was the thing that kind of convinced me to give Meteor a try, was how fast and easy it was to prototype and build an application. And so I remember coming in one day and talking to, I have a background of working with Rails for about 8 years. So, I was very comfortable being able to pump things out in 8 to 10 weeks and, get an application ready for a client. But we started having conversations about what would it look like if, we started building the reactive side of things. We wanted a page, you click a button and something updates and you're not reloading the page. So we started looking at Angular and Ember and doing comparisons and, what if we bolt this onto the Rails apps we're building. And I spent a weekend porting an app from Rails that was actually having trouble with the gem to Meteor, and I was able to use the Node package to do some AirPlay functionality I wanted. And I was able to get the whole thing done in a day and a half. So I was super impressed with it, and I went in and just kind of showed it off to the rest of the team and said, hey, look at this thing. We can use this and give it a try, and I think this would actually solve our reactive kind of needs on the client side. So the thing that I think is great, and for me, Rails is always going to be that comparison point that I go back to. So I'm not trying to downplay Rails. I think it's been a great framework for me, professionally and personally. But the key difference here is in the packaging system, it's easy to create what I think Rails engines always wanted to be. So you're able to create a little bit of functionality that includes, the client side, the server side, any database interaction, and you just package it up and people can drop it into their app. And so they get these nice little features. For instance, we wrote a blog package, and so you just say Meteor add, I think it's RyW blog, and that just drops in, and all of a sudden you've got an interface, an admin interface, and you can start blogging, and everything gets outputted, and it's got all the nice slugs and that kind of thing. So the promise that I always hoped Rails engines would be, I feel like the packaging system here is. The other great thing about the packaging system is that it has NPM integration. So for instance, this billing package uses the Stripe, this is all based on Stripe, and it uses the Stripe NPM package under the covers. And so what we built here is the ability to say, Meteor add billing, and you get this UI, the client-side UI that allows you to start charging credit cards. You just put in your keys, and when you come to the page, the billing page, or you insert the little template helper, you get all the credit card charging stuff right there. And then the great thing is with the NPM integration, you get all the webhook stuff that someone else has already built, and it just starts working. So we were able to build this package in, I think, 2 days and get full Stripe integration going on. The other great thing about the packaging system is the fact that you actually have to be conscious of putting stuff into the global namespace with Meteor. So if you want to, say, add a helper of some sort, you actually have to create a namespace, put your functions in there, and then export that. And so I think it makes things a little cleaner. It's just JavaScript. This is another reason that I was drawn to this framework. I started with Ruby. Like I said, I did about 8 years of Rails work, and somewhere in there, probably the last 2 years, 2.5 years, started transitioning to Backbone and starting to do a little more single-page app type stuff. This screenshot is from GitHub. I think this is interesting because, as a back-end developer, I started moving towards JavaScript. And I think, to me, jQuery is kind of like the gateway drug for front-end developers as well. Like, they come in and start learning JavaScript as well, and you kind of meet in the middle, right? I mean, everyone had their hand up that they know JavaScript. So I think this is a great common denominator. And the fact that, we had a designer at Differential who struggled with figuring out how to work Rails on his laptop. We installed Meteor, and he pretty much got it right away. And he was running the boilerplate that we based all our apps off of. He was the one handling those pull requests and updating Meteor when a new version came out. So to me, that was like very different and pretty phenomenal to witness because having trained 4 or 5 different designers on Rails, like that was always seemed like a little bit of a painful process. React like it's 2014. So we're not building web apps that are non-responsive or non-reactive anymore. Facebook and Twitter and native apps and those kinds of things kind of have pushed, I guess, consumers to expect something better from us rather than, clicking and waiting for a page to load and then maybe getting what you expect to see. So Meteor gives you an easy way to kind of get into all this new kind of reactionary development. You're able to, it uses PubSub under the covers, so you're able to just specify the kind of data that you want, and it comes down over the wire, and then you just use it however you want in the front end on the client side. So we'll actually get under the covers a little bit here. It's definitely more than a framework. I think if you watch the kind of the later releases that have been coming out from them, it's becoming more of a platform. And so, on the back end, you've got Node.js, and then that's been wrapped up with fibers so that it's synchronous. And then on the front end, I guess on the back end, you've got some other APIs that are built around there, libraries. And then on the front end, you have a matching set of APIs. And so you're able to, write your collection code on the back end and the front end. Like, you just stick it in one spot, and it goes to both the client and the server. And so you tend to be writing code in one spot, and you're able to reuse it. So that's pretty awesome. And then the other great thing that happens is they've got DDP, which is the protocol for transferring data over the wire through WebSockets. They use eJSON, which is a standard for serializing JSON data. It adds more types of objects for serializing. So when you publish the data, it comes down through DDP. It's been serialized. It deserializes on the other end, and then you're able to use everything on the front end. Sorry, I lost my train of thought. Yeah, I don't know where I was going with that. So you've got this set of standards that I guess that they've built, the DDP, the eJSON. They've got their own build tool, so you don't use something like Grunt. You just use Meteor Run, Meteor Build. And the great thing about the build tool is the fact that you can just say Meteor at CoffeeScript, and all of a sudden you're writing a CoffeeScript. I don't know if there's a closure script. I'm sure there is, but plugin. But you can add all these things. So there's Sass and there's Stylus and there's Less. All this support. You just Meteor add the package, and then you get that kind of compiling functionality right there. And then the other really neat thing that they've added recently is when you say Meteor add platform iOS or Meteor add platform Android, you get all the Cordova stuff for free. And so if you have Xcode installed and you add that platform, when you say Meteor build, it actually just spits out a Cordova compiled native application. So it does a lot of the heavy lifting there for you, which is starting to get really interesting as well. So. The other thing that is different for me, especially coming from Rails, like the community there was great, but it seems like the community here is more connected. And maybe that's a function of the fact that they've taken $11.5 million in funding so far, and they actually have community managers that are helping to push it forward. But there are events like this that I think really help new developers kind of get off the ground. And so they do this monthly. It's called a dev shop. And if you ever go out to San Francisco, I would highly recommend trying to make this. It's the last Thursday of every month. And they open their doors at 2 o'clock. People come in. They invite experts to come in and kind of sit down and help people that are hacking on projects, trying to learn. And really, they just want it to be a great learning environment for people who are getting started or for people to connect. And so from 2 o'clock until like 6 o'clock, it's just open hacking. And then 6 o'clock, they serve dinner for free, which is awesome. And then starting around 7 o'clock, they do an hour of talks, 2 talks, half hour each. And then they do five or six lightning talks. And the awesome part is, I live in Cincinnati. They're in San Francisco, but they actually live stream the entire event over YouTube. And so I actually get to participate because I can watch online and I can leave comments, and they actually have moderators that are sitting there and watching, and they'll take questions from people on YouTube. So it's pretty awesome. And then the other great thing is that it's all recorded onto YouTube for later, so we've got this great cache of videos that are available to anyone kind of coming into the community, and they can see how people are doing things or see some of these past talks, which is pretty great. The other thing I was going to mention here is, with the organization of kind of the community, the meetup captains, they have a Google group, and this has been pretty awesome to watch as well. So all around the world, there's probably 200 or 300 people that are running meetups or helping with meetups, and so they're all in this Google group. And the other day, like Meteor came out with a new logo, and someone said, "Hey, we need to update all the meetups to have this new logo." And so he whipped up a quick Meteor app and used SVG, and it's got a little banner generator, so you can just put in your city name and hit save, and it puts it out. And so he put that out on the captain's mailing list, and within, I think, 2 hours, this guy was in London. Within 2 hours, someone in Sweden had jumped in and started adding to it and tweaking it and sending in pull requests. So it's pretty awesome to just see that interaction kind of happening. So this is the screenshot of what kind of brought me here to Meteor. I was a pro subscriber to Railscast, and Ryan Bates put out a series of videos that went through the same application over and over and over again, and he built it in different frameworks. And so it was this side-by-side comparison of all the JavaScript frameworks that were available at the time. So he's got, you can see there Ember Part 2. There was, I think, a two-parter on Angular, a two-parter on Backbone, and then there was a one-parter for Meteor. It was 15 minutes. Whereas the Ember stuff or the Angular stuff, they were about a half an hour. So that made me perk up, because anytime someone's able to cut down coding time by 50%, that's pretty significant. So made me pay attention. All right, so the state of deployment. I get this question a lot, so I added this slide in here. People ask, is it scalable? Where can I host it? I would say, yes, it's scalable. I know that there are big customers out there. I actually don't know their name, but I do know that they serve quite a bit of traffic. I'm doing some work for one that handles about 100 to 200 concurrent sessions a day. So we haven't had to scale it too big, but we're able to serve that off one process. So it seems pretty easy. So the options for deploying, you have DigitalOcean and AWS. Those are, if you want to roll your own, those are great. You can even use a tool called Meteor to get started. So if you're not feeling comfortable or familiar with Meteor yet, Meteor is kind of like Capistrano or something like that. So you're able to just say, I think it's like Meteor setup and then Meteor deploy, and it'll push the application up there for you. It does all the bundling and pushing. The only thing is you have to be prepared to manage your Mongo database yourself with that. And that might get a little tricky if you're not familiar with that. And then on the other side, you have, Meteor has its own platform, which is free, but they don't really offer any support on it. So if something breaks, you're tweeting at them or hoping to hear back from an email. It might take a while. So it's not the greatest option, but I think it's really good for prototyping and putting something up there. You can just say Meteor deploy and then give it a name, and it'll deploy that app for you at that subdomain. So it'd be like, if I picked up Cincinnati, I could do cincinnati.meteor.com for our local meetup or something like that. And then your other options, moving more into the platform as a service, you've got Heroku and Modulus. Heroku is okay to get started with, but they don't support sticky sessions, and Meteor really needs sticky sessions because of the hot code calculations they're doing under the covers to determine whether you need a new version or not pushed down to you. So I would highly recommend Modulus if you're looking to do some deploy. They did a package called Demeteorizer early on, which took your Meteor app and turned it into a regular old Node app that they could then host on their platform. They've since changed that, but those guys have been pretty top-notch in support of the Meteor community from the get-go. So I'm a big fan of theirs, but they're also from Cincinnati. So. Yeah, so the biggest thing for me coming into this was the testing situation when I came into Meteor. It was in a pretty sad state. There were two frameworks out there. Both were very confusing and not well documented, and they were something that you ran kind of outside of your Meteor app. So you'd spin up a Meteor app, and then they would connect to it, and they do some stuff with it, and then you're worried about, you've got your testing data coming into your dev environment, which gets a little weird. And so I just decided I wanted to understand this better and maybe help other people understand it better. So I started writing a book on testing, testingmeteor.com. And when I did that, a funny thing happened. I got invited to a meetup, an online meetup, and participated in it. I knew a little bit about the package testing framework that Meteor had built. That was the chapter I'd written at the time. And they got together the other kind of testing framework creators, and we all started having conversations, and we found it very enlightening. And so we started getting together weekly, and now we've come up with this new thing called Velocity. So this is a test runner, and any framework author can plug into it. And you get reactive testing for free. So here you can see this is like the Mocha test framework. It's been plugged in and is running behind the scenes. But you just say like Meteor add, I think it's Mike Mocha, or Meteor add Sanjo Jasmine, and you'll get those frameworks, and you can just start writing your test just like you would in any other framework. So it's really starting to get interesting. And then the other thing I love here is this is fully reactive. So when you hit save on a file, under the covers, we can actually look at the file that's changed and look at the code coverage changes and figure out like which tests we need to run. And so it's really interesting to be able to just hit save on a file and watch those tests change. So there are definitely places that I think Meteor can improve. One of those is Mongo is the only database that's officially supported right now, and a lot of people view that as a downside. But they've written a driver called Mini Mongo that sits on top of Mongo and does a lot of the real-time kind of communication back and forth. And so at this point, everyone is waiting for another database to come out. With 1.0 coming out probably next week or in 2 weeks, we're not going to see any new database support there yet, but it is something that they're working on. They've hired a full-time guy. They made an announcement about it, I guess 2 weeks ago. They acquired FathomDB, but he's actually been part of the team since May, so I know he's been working hard on getting new support. I hear it might be Postgres, could be interesting. But the fun thing is, with the packaging system, you don't have to just rely on the officially supported stuff. I know there's drivers out there for Elasticsearch, and there's drivers out there for Neo4j and all kinds of stuff. So, if you want to use something else, you can. It's just, you have to think about how to build that package reactively, or whoever built it has to think about how to build it reactively if you want the real-time updates. If those things kind of matter. So. The other one is error handling. So the downside of using Node on the back end is if you don't catch an error properly and it crashes the Node app, then your site stops working. And so you have to remember to wrap everything up and catch your errors properly and do the right thing with them. And that's sometimes a little scary. So I think they can do a better job there. In particular, you have to understand when you're in the Node environment as well, if you're going to rely on an NPM package and the NPM package throws an error, then if you haven't wrapped it with the synchronous code, then that could be a problem as well. So queuing, this is another area. So I helped build an app called Fantasy Hub, and the idea behind the app is for charities to come on and put their charity in, and then they can create a one-day game around fantasy sports. And they were doing, at the time, we wrote it for the NBA, so you would go in and draft players, and then we would start fetching scores as the games went live, and you get this real-time kind of score dashboard that would update and show you where you are versus your opponents. And the problem there is I felt like we had to build this crazy scaffolding of set intervals and set timeouts. So on process startup, we would set interval like every minute, and we would check and see if there are any new games starting. And then once a game would start, we'd push that ID in somewhere into an array, and then we would check that array every 20 seconds and make a call to Sports Data API, and we would pull those stats in. And so we were getting up to every 20 seconds we were getting the stats. So it was pretty close to real time. And, it was interesting, but at the same time, if there was a bug anywhere in there, I feel like there should be a better way to handle that kind of process. I should just be able to say, run this job, and the job gets taken care of. And if it fails, I don't have to worry about it. But the error handling that I was talking about before, sports data, their API went down, and we didn't have any wrappers error handling around their package. And so when it went down, it took the app down. And so we got a call from the customer like, hey, what's going on? Our site's down. And that was a little frustrating. I think, obviously with better error handling, we could have done better there. But with better queuing support as well, it shouldn't take down the entire app. So that's kind of it. Any questions? Sure.
So I did a little bit of work with Meteor, some personal stuff, probably 8 months ago now, so it's been a while. But at the time, everything that I saw, examples of things out there, and everything that I could figure out how to do sort of quickly from the documentation was sort of they were all kind of smallish, like one page, you've got your app inside that page, but if you want to actually proceed to a whole different screen or a whole new UI for a different segment, I had to or this is how I figured out how to do it, was to hide and show divs all using JavaScript, all sort of in one HTML container.
Yeah.
Is that still sort of how things are done, or am I just misunderstanding the framework entirely?
Yeah, so the question was, how do you kind of transition from one view to another?
Right.
I would say maybe it's not well documented, but I would say the easiest way to handle that is through Iron Router. I still maintain that it should be folded in as part of the core project. I really feel bad for the guy that runs that project because it's in like 99% of all Meteor applications, but it handles all the routing for you. And so that's where you queue up your subscriptions to get your data, and it handles routing from the URL down to the JavaScript view templates that you want. And so it handles kind of changing all those views out for you. Yeah, and that's all reactive, and it uses the tracker calculations to know when things change. So, sure.
I'm curious about Minimongo. How does it store data in the browser? Are there any limitations?
So the question was, how does Minimongo store data in the browser? I believe it just stores it in memory. So there are options. There's one called GroundDB, which is kind of interesting. And that would allow you to store it in local storage as well. But that's more of I think, a caching option. And that's particularly like GroundDB is made for when your application goes offline. That data is still there, and they can still kind of move around and work with it, which to me is interesting. Like I really want to try throwing GroundDB into a Cordova application and just see does it just work? Will I just get offline browsing of my application? That would be kind of amazing.
What about limitations? Are there any amount of data?
Yeah, so if you push too much data down the pipe at one time, your browser will actually kind of just freeze. But it's a pretty big size. I think I was pushing 40 or 50,000 records down over DDP. And that's when you'd get that 30-second lock there where you couldn't do anything. But generally, the pub sub is the heart and soul of your Meteor application. And so you'll spend a lot of time there once you get into scaling, fine-tuning how much data you're pushing across and only pushing the data you need and that kind of thing. And then on the server side, they've got the notion, this thing called the merge box, which is how they're watching for those changes to happen from Mongo, and then making sure they push it down to the clients that need it. So I guess you could potentially run into trouble there, but I haven't seen any yet. But that would just chew up your memory. Any more questions? Sure.
I know in Node you can use something called process domain for error handling. Is that something that Meteor supports, or is it trying to understand the relationship of Meteor to Node?
So the question was understanding the relationship between Meteor and Node?
Yeah, the example is error.
Error handling,
If I'm
okay.
using process domain, I can capture or catch those exceptions and errors.
Yeah.
Or-
So I would say it really is just a Node app on the back end. And the only thing that they've done is wrap fibers around Node. And so that just means like everything's synchronous. So when I do a Meteor call or something like that in the back end, it's going to sit and wait. And so you actually need to be cognizant of that when you bring an NPM package in. Usually you have to wrap it up to be synchronous. But there are a lot of good tools for that. There's a package called async. And it's got a wrapper method that you give it the method and it wraps it up and makes it all synchronous for you. So pretty slick. Yeah. Any other questions? Sure.
Can you talk a little bit more about the Mongo side of things? Or description or mention something called catalog gaming?
Yeah. Okay. So if you're not familiar with Mongo, the way that you tend to scale it out is through not sharding, but what do you call that when you have multiples? Huh? Replica sets. Thank you. And so when you set up a replica set, the way that the kind of the primary and the secondary talk to each other is through this op log. And it's basically just a big log of changes that have happened on the master, and it gets pushed down to the secondary. The secondary actually says, hey, I need the op log, and it's a collection within, a special collection within Mongo that it watches and grabs changes off of. And so what Meteor does, this is particularly helpful for scaling as well. If you have a replica set, you can subscribe to the op log. And so rather than doing a pull and diff, which is how they initially started, if you have two Meteor processes running, before what would happen is you'd make a change on the first one, it would push that up. Any client that was connected to the first one, if the change was accepted, they immediately got the update. If they were on the other server or the other process, the pull and diff would happen every 10 seconds. So they were really, it wasn't real time, they were getting like a 10-second lag there. But now with oplog, each process just subscribes to the oplog and they get notified when that change happens on the Mongo server. And so that's actually reduced CPU utilization on the server side. We used to see somewhere between 80 to 90% if we had more than one process running. But now, it tends to hover around 5 to 10% for, an empty app. So oplog's pretty good for that. But I would say the downside to that is that if you push a lot of data, I can show you. This is Kadira. This is a Meteor app. And it's a Meteor app that monitors your Meteor apps for performance. A little meta there. But so he's getting data into this thing every second from tons of applications. And so I think if he used the same database for the front end for this app, that would actually be a problem because all that data, like all those, there's no way to say I just care about these oplog changes. You just get all the oplog changes. That might change soon. But so what he does is he's got an API server that sits in front, collects the stats, goes into the first Mongo database, and then he aggregates all that, and then that gets pushed into the application Mongo database, which is what I'm connected to here. And so I can kind of see these stats. And he does interesting things like pre-aggregating, so I can switch over to 30 minutes, and it's nice and quick. So. Sure.
You mentioned that in order for Meteor to work well, you need to have sticky sessions configured. What happens if one of your nodes dies? Is that just it takes longer for the next request to be initialized? Or is it actually the session's gone and they have to relog in and start a new session?
So the question is, what happens if a process goes away, and what does that look like to the client? Okay. I would say, this is all really dependent on what your setup looks like. So for the sake of just talking through this, let's say you have like HA proxy, and you've got the sticky session set up, and you connect to process A, I connect to process B. Process A goes down. I would think at some point HA proxy should pick that up and say, hey, this is down. You'll be fine until HA proxy says, hey, it's down, and routes you over to the other one, and you'll see a page reload happen at that point. So what's happening under the covers there is it's detecting which version of the client that you're running, but it's doing that based on the process as well. So when you connect to a new process, it thinks, oh, hey, they need the version of code that I'm running, and so they'll push it down to them. And so that's why the sticky sessions matter, because you want to keep them connected to the same.
Data itself is probably a model, so either process or
Yeah. Yeah, that is in a Mongo collection, actually. Sure.
The question is, Node.js, I'm not deeply familiar with that. You mentioned that it wrapped Meteor world with fibers.
Yes.
How does that work? Is there a delivery policy? One fiber for each one at a time?
Yes, I believe so. So I haven't taken a dive into this code too much, but my understanding is that yes, it would create. I mean, it's a vented code, right? So it would create the equivalent of, a thread at that point, or a fiber in this case, and respond to the request. So, I mean, yeah.
Does that have impact on performance then?
I haven't seen anything. I mean, so I would say the one that we're probably most data heavy with is Fantasy Hub. And so in the back end, we're running a ton of, fetching jobs and that kind of thing. And then on the front end, they're able to serve up quite a few requests as well. So I would say the most I've ever seen a single process handle would be somewhere around 700 to 800 concurrent users at a time. And it was starting to get overloaded, so we jumped it up to have a second servo at that point. Any other questions? All right. Well, thanks for coming.